Welcome to Knights of the Storm. I'm your host, Karen. And on behalf of the folks at Knights of the Storm, I hope that everybody had just a really restful and a joyful week this week with Thanksgiving, and possibly still enjoying some leftovers this afternoon while we hear some history from the legendary Don Jeffries. We're so happy to have Don with us. But first, I'd like to introduce our co-host, Ashley. Think, change, repeat. Ashley's been a little under the weather, so it's great to see you today, Ashley.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the well wishes. I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation, and if I make a quick exit, then maybe I have to powder my nose or something like that. So, but thank you very much, Karen. Happy to be here.
We definitely understand. And then behind the scenes, producing for us today is the multi-purpose tech wizard, Jason Barker. So Jason, great to have you with us today behind the scenes, and love that special intro made just for Dawn. Don't back down, Tom Petty. And Dawn, it's so great to have you today. As Billy Ray Valentine says, Don Jeffries, the legendary. We live in a time several decades removed from the history of the JFK assassination and the RFK assassination. Moving forward, we had the JFK Jr. assassination, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and then, of course, moving forward, we've had so many turbulent years, and it all seems to kind of kick off around the time of the Kennedy JFK assassination. But if we go a little bit further back in time, the Kennedy family has history that many of us aren't aware of. Some of us are, but as time moves forward, we tend to forget these things a little bit further back in history. And I've been reading your book this week, American Memory Hole, and had a few little conversations with one of your three searchers, Peter Seakosh. And so Peter's just a wealth of information and an all-around great person. Such a great person. I'm so glad to know him as well as I do. So I was hoping that you go into the history of the Kennedys. We hardly knew ye. So I'd like to have you spend a little bit of time on the history of the Kennedy family and how they had an adversarial relationship with several key figures going back at least one generation before John F. Kennedy and his brothers.
Yeah, well, I thanks for that. And Joseph Kennedy Sr. was the patriarch, basically the founder of the Klan. That's where they first started becoming prominent. They were poor Irish immigrants, initially, and he became, I think, the nation's youngest bank president at age 25, which is pretty impressive, right there. And eventually, FDR, who hated him and he didn't trust Roosevelt. He had all the right enemies, much like Trump, but differently from Trump, he walked the walk sometimes. But he was named the ambassador to Great Britain. So he first came into, prominence in terms of making the right enemies while he was ambassador to Great Britain, because, excuse me, this was in the 1930s. Young Winston Churchill and FDR and lots of everybody had any kind of power were pushing very hard to go to war with Nazi Germany. And so Kennedy saw this, and Kennedy was and I found out a lot of this stuff from reading RFK Jr.'s book, Family Values, which is a really good book. And he does other than what I do with my platform, nobody else is defending the Kennedy family. He defended his grandfather and said some interesting things about him. But for instance, I learned that he was a World War I anti-war activist as well. So Joe Kennedy Sr. was anti-war to the core. He was part of the America First movement in the 1930s. And so when JFK made that speech, President Kennedy made the speech at American University, the peace speech, he came by it naturally. That was in his blood. His father was a great anti-war activist. Now, the average American, all they know about Joe Kennedy is that they instantly think corruption. They think he was a bootlegger, which is nonsense. And they think, and if he was a bootlegger, there were lots of bootleggers in. It's not like it was that tremendous of a crime, and that he was associated with the mafia, which he absolutely was not. And this has become the mythology. They go a little deeper, and they might call him anti-Semitic. because, you know, he was friends with Neville Chamberlain. He did not want us to get involved in World War II, so that automatically makes you anti-Semitic for some reason. But he also was one of the early critics of the Federal Reserve. So Joe Kennedy Sr. knew everything, and I try to talk to when I say about the you know, JFK. Joe Kennedy Jr., I believe, was assassinated as well, his oldest son, and RFK and Teddy Kennedy. They were steeped in this. Their father. What made Joe Kennedy Sr. so different is that, you know, the average father in that era was kind of hands off. The mother did most of the rearing. You know, the father kind of, maybe they disciplined the children, you know, but they weren't hands on, like playing with them all the time and everything. Joe Kennedy Sr. and certainly nobody in Joe Kennedy Sr.'s class. Those people had nannies and, you know, housekeepers and everything. They did nothing really. I mean, he was different. He was hands on to the core. He did everything with his children. He made sure they ate dinner together, you know, whenever they could, and they had, you know, stimulating discussions at the dinner table. And, you know, this is a guy who talked about Jewish power in the 1930s in America, openly about it, who talked about war and was opposed to war, was bad-mouthing Roosevelt, knew about the Federal Reserve. So imagine what the young Kennedy kids were steeped in. They heard all this growing up. So when JFK became president, it wasn't an accident. Those people who understand how he was raised, you know, and Joe Kennedy Sr. was also one of the first critics of the CIA. I only learned that through RFK Jr.'s book, Family Values. There was a presidential commission that's never talked of in the 1950s to look at the CIA. Joe Kennedy Sr. was the most outspoken member of it, and he's the one that said, hey, we've got to corral these people. You know, this is 20 years before the Church Committee. I had no idea about that except for RFK Jr. So imagine how the CIA felt when his son became president. Imagine how the Federal Reserve felt. Imagine how, you know, prominent Jews in general felt. Imagine how Israel felt. And of course, it was no accident. JFK Jr. gets in there. He resists war. I mean, over JFK Sr. go resist war over and over again. He was rumored to be printing his own silver certificates and perhaps maybe reigning in the Federal Reserve at the time of his death. He was at war with Israel. We know he was engaged in a series of exchanges with David Ben-Gurion over Israel developing nuclear weapons. All this came from what his father believed, even though very coincidentally, Joe Kennedy Sr., who wasn't that old at the time, he had a terrible stroke right as JFK took office. And, you know, some people think that wasn't an accident because that basically crippled because he couldn't talk at all. He couldn't communicate anymore. JFK, his father was his number one advisor. And so it kind of took away. So he had to, you know, kind of step on his own, but he remembered where he came from. And so I think when people hear about the mythology, and it is mythology, and as RFK Jr. said, every one of those rumors about bootlegging, the mafia and all that, all can be traced to CIA or mafia sources, every one. And so I just think if you look at Joe Kennedy Sr. in total, he was a remarkable man. I think he's one of the heroes of the 20th century. And it just, who could go through that kind of tragedy? He lost 4 children to unnatural deaths. He lost Joe Kennedy Jr., who was, that guy would have been the first president. If you've seen pictures of him, he was even better looking than JFK. He was a natural politician, unlike JFK. JFK was an introvert who wanted to be a writer. This guy was a natural. He would have been perfect, and he was even more steeped in his father's lore. You know, in terms of he was his father's son. He idolized him. And but you know, he died in a very mysterious plane crash at the end of the war, and I've talked about it, where it made no sense. They had him go on a bombing mission to bomb a German site that had been long abandoned. You know, bombing an abandoned site. That was. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Karen. You look like you want to say something.
Well, I wanted to not interrupt you, but I can't help myself. First of all, that you have a great quote in your book that American Memory Hole that I've been reading from Joseph Kennedy Sr. about being anti-war. Has a war or violence ever? What has it ever done for your family? Basically, you know, what have we gained from a war? And is anything that we could gain from it worth losing the life of your child, of your son? So it's a great quote. The quotes in your book are fantastic. When you talk about each new person, you pull a quote in from that person, and they're wonderful quotes. And I also, I I went a couple of years ago, I bought RFK Jr.'s book, Family Values, for myself, my mom, and my daughter. And we had a little book club and read his book together. I'm very, very familiar with RFK Jr. Before he ran for president. And I said before, I think I've heard every word he ever said until recently when he really turned me off about a few things. I kind of laid off, but previous to that, yes. And so I understand what you mean. And the oldest child, Joseph, the oldest child, it makes sense. The oldest child is usually more aware and more of a serious, person in the family. But was it one of FDR's relatives that actually was involved in the plane crash and retrieval of the body?
Well, no, they never found the body, but no, the FDR's son, it's Archibald Roosevelt, I think it was. Elliot Roosevelt, maybe. I may get the name wrong. I think it was Elliot Roosevelt. He was the witness. He was the only
Okay.
he happened to be flying closest to JFK, to Joe Kennedy Jr. I mean, okay, maybe that's just a wild coincidence. So it was his recollection that became the narrative. The plane blew up. They never found his body, so they never found a trace of him. Unfortunately. And later, and I talk about later in life, Elliot Roosevelt became kind of a typical political crook or a business crook. I mean, he was involved in lots of shady activities, and so I don't think he had anything to do with that. But I do think he was assassinated. I can't find out that much information about it, but I just go by, and I have some of this, and what I could find, I have in the book. And there's not much there, that you can go on because obviously it wasn't investigated much. But we do know that the son of this guy who was an enemy of the establishment. This guy, he had all the right enemies. Churchill hated him. FDR hated him. Everybody in power, all the warmongers hated him, and he was not like the rest of the members of his class. The mythology around Roosevelt is that he was a traitor to his class, which is absolute nonsense. Real hero like Huey Long, I have great quotes for him in lots of my books about how all the bankers, they were all, every name in banking was in Roosevelt's administration, all the insiders, and yet they continue to perpetuate the mythology that, he's going against Wall Street. Which is ridiculous. He was so, and you see in American Memory Life, thanks to Peter Seacars, our friend who did most of that research. He's tied so much to Wall Street and tied so much to financial interests. Where Joe Kennedy Sr., I've looked into, I wrote Survival of the Richest. I've looked into these elites, these 1%ers, and he's the cleanest one I found. I can't find any, the old saying, the old writer, Victor Hugo, I think it was, it said, "There's no such thing as behind every very rich man lies behind every great man lies behind every great fortune lies a great crime," or something like that. And I can't find the crime for Joe Kennedy Sr. I don't think he was a bootlegger, and that wouldn't have, made his fortune anyhow because he was already bank president. He was also a studio head in Hollywood, a very small studio. So he looking at the scandal surrounding him, again, they're the ones they can come up with are, did he sleep with Gloria Swanson? I don't know. He slept with Gloria Swanson and his son slept with Marilyn Monroe. And I don't know. I don't see how that happened, but if so, I mean, how big a scandal is that? And in the grand scale of things. But so I think he holds up pretty well against his peers, and he doesn't deserve the reputation he has. And I think he lost his oldest son in a plane crash. He lost his oldest daughter in a separate plane crash. What are the odds of that? And then he had a third son, Ted Kennedy, who somehow didn't die, but it was involved in another plane crash where people did die. He survived it and was holed up in a hospital for 6 months with a broken back. So just imagine you had kids, 3 of your kids were in separate plane crashes. And I talk about the Kennedys in planes, of course, later JFK Jr. You had Robert F. Kennedy, and I talked about this in American Memory. I had no idea until I looked this up, but RFK's wife, Ethel, who just died recently, RFK Jr.'s mother, her parents were killed in a plane crash.
Wow.
And her brother was killed in a separate plane crash.
Interesting.
RFK, they tell us what the odds are of, being in a plane crash. You have Robert F. Kennedy Sr. He's married to a woman who lost her parents and her brother in separate plane crashes. He lost 2 of his siblings in separate plane crashes. Plus, Teddy was involved in another one. That's 5 plane crashes. between a husband and wife. I mean, why would any Kennedy ever fly? I mean, JFK Jr. wanted to become a pilot after all that.
Yeah.
But so anyhow, of course, he lost those two kids. He lost JFK and Bobby to murder. So those are 4 deaths right there. Ted Kennedy was involved in Chappaquiddick, which I'd go into that as well. I think that was his political assassination. So all this tragedy he had to deal with, losing 4 kids, and they're like beyond something even they would write about, in Greek tragedies. And so I always felt for the guy just because. Plus, he had a daughter, Rosemary, who was slow in the parlance of the times, and he tried to, and he's been criticized like he did this on purpose. She was very beautiful, and she was already, this is like the 1940s or whatever, and she was already kind of going out late at night, and she probably was easy to fool in the parlance of the time because she wasn't, she was, she seemed relatively normal, but she wasn't up to snuff in terms of that kind of a family. So he wanted to fix her like any father would, and they had this cutting edge technology that was only available in, I think, Switzerland at the time, very expensive, only the rich could afford it, and so he took the advantage. He wanted to fix his daughter. And of course, it was frontal lobotomy. They didn't know what that would do eventually. So unfortunately, she became like a 3-year-old. Spent the rest of her long life in an institution. But he's been criticized for that. And I said, do you really think he wanted that to happen? I mean, he tried to help her, and yeah, maybe it was wrong, but he didn't know. He thought they were telling him it was this is a miracle. She'll be just like is normal. So all that tragedy for one person, and now he's got to put up with historians, crapping on him and coming up with all these lies. And in reality, he was a great patriot, I think, and a great father.
Okay. I wanted to ask or tie in maybe the problems with being the Catholic family or the anti-Catholic sentiment, and then move into the ways in which JFK was in conflict with other forces, CIA, etc. I watched, and Ashley has something also. I watched I rewatched Oliver Stone's latest Kennedy documentary last night, and I had seen it about a week. So I watched it a couple times in the last couple of weeks. And there's a section toward the end where they talk about JFK told an ambassador that he doesn't have control of all of his administration, that he's not sure what the CIA is doing, and he doesn't have control of them. And he was talking about Charles de Gaulle being overthrown, and he was not for that, but there was a plot to do that. And then Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, there was a plot to get rid of him, which RFK Jr. was not aware of, and he tried to stop it, and he was murdered, and then he was lied to. He didn't even know that he had been murdered. When JFK tried to intervene, they went ahead and killed Lumumba. And then there was Operation Northwoods and all of the lies, and false flags and things that were, the threatening. So I wanted to get into how he truly was at odds with the CIA and the Dulles brothers, etc., how he fired some of them, but also talk about the Catholic connection. And then Ashley wanted to throw something in. Ashley, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the Dulles brothers because this was one of my main questions. So, I know that there was a lot of points that they did not, that they were adversarial on, but it seems to be well accepted at this point that the Dulles brothers were pro Germany, pro Nazi, that they had these Nazi connections, and that they were responsible, at least in facilitating some of the Nazis coming back to the United States, and they were kind of friendly to that camp, and it became unpopular at the time. So I would have thought that this would be a point of agreement with the Kennedy family, as they were, I'm not saying they were pro-Nazi, but I'm saying that they were kind of anti-Zionist and didn't maybe necessarily approve of what was happening. So I wanted to get your thoughts on a little bit of that dynamic, as Karen was asking about, and as well, at some point, if we can talk about the deliberate smear campaign against the Kennedys overall and what you think that is about. But
and then I want to get into the Bird family later on, and then possibly other more esoteric things.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, when Kennedy entered the White House, I can't believe that, as he said, I can't believe they're where, in one of his press conferences, I can't believe I'm where they want me, and so he was accused like big business being behind him or something. But um, Allen Dulles was the director of the CIA still then, and Allen Dulles, had been director when his father sat on that commission in the 1950s and made the first public comments against the CIA and said they needed to be reined in. So they remembered it's actually said. I'm not sure. The problem is when they try to tie people like anybody tie them to the Nazis. Yeah, they're Wall Street was behind Hitler. There's a book called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler by Professor Andy Sutton, which does a good job of showing that. But I think it can be demonstrated definitely that the Dulles brothers were behind Operation Paperclip, as the entire establishment was. That was to bring over Werner von Braun and all these other people to run NASA, and Reinhard Gehlen, to run the basically the OSS, but that became the CIA. So they were. I don't know that they were in favor of the Nazis during the war. I mean, I'm not sure that can be demonstrated, but they certainly were in favor of that because that was part of the plan. And why that was a part of the plan, I don't know. But on the at the beginning of his administration, he was hit with the Bay of Pigs, which is a seminal event, and it had been planned in the Eisenhower administration, and Richard Nixon, the vice president, kind of oversaw that. And he's kind of political figurehead, it's a CIA thing, but and Kennedy again was naive. He went in there. He went in there thinking he was president. As I said, JFK is the last president to think he was in charge. And
Mhm.
I think he had no idea that things were quite this bad, even though his father had told him a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
But his father had a stroke now, so his father couldn't advise him even on the Bay of Pigs. So he was his own guy. Finally, he'd been kind of in the shadow of his father and been kind of manipulated to a degree by his father, and now he had to be independent. So he had to deal with this Bay of Pigs thing, and then they asked him for air support, and he said, "No, this is already in too deep." So a lot of the Cubans end up hating him because a lot of people got slaughtered. But the whole idea was stupid and ridiculous. It was never going to work, and JFK realized it. But he's unlike a lot of politicians. He stood up. He made a great speech saying, I'm to blame. I'm the responsible
Mhm.
party of the government, so I accept full blame for this. He didn't lash out at the CIA, but he did very quickly fire Allen Dulles and Richard Bissell and Charles Cabell. Charles Cabell, these are the top three officials in the CIA.
Mhm.
And Cabell happened to be the brother of Earl Cabell, who was the mayor of Dallas at the time that JFK's
Mhm.
motorcade went through there. And then later we found one of the later file releases, to no one's surprise, Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas, was revealed as the CIA asset himself, as a
Mhm.
lot of these local political figures were. So he got on the, Allen Dulles was, he called, this little punk JFK or something, which, he lashed out at him. That really had to hurt his pride because, he was fired by this young whippersnapper who was the son of a man he hated. And so that really shook up the CIA. And instantly JFK realized, well, the CIA is a problem. He remembered what his father had said about him. And he started, hey, we got to do something about this. He made his comments in private about shattering the CIA into 1,000 pieces into the wind and all these things. Everybody's heard that. And he basically, RFK, he was his right hand man. It was his attorney general, but he basically tasked RFK for basically overseeing what the Joint Chiefs of Staff was doing and what the CIA was doing. And so RFK became very powerful, and he just trusted him. Basically JFK was at war, as you said, with the CIA. And I think you were alluded to later, right before earlier, I think it was a month before his death, or maybe less than that. The New York Times published an article called "The Administration Was at War with the CIA" or something. It was written by Arthur Kroc, who was a good friend of Joe Kennedy Sr. And so again, I'm sure they had talked about this stuff before. And they talked about a close, confidential source in the White House. Most people think that source was JFK himself. That talked about if a coup came within the government, it would come from the CIA. And that
Mhm.
how he said it was a government unto itself, and he wasn't sure that even the president could control it. So that was interesting. It came out, right before he was assassinated. So he was at war with the CIA, obviously, at the time that he was assassinated. He was at war with the Pentagon. General Curtis LeMay, Dr. Strangelove was over there, another probable conspirator, I think, pretty likely, who wanted to go to nuclear war, like a lot of them did with over Cuba. And again, Kennedy was. This is something presidents don't do. You see it in Trump. He's ordered to bomb Syria, he bombs it. Ordered to bomb Iran, he bombs them. JFK was single-handedly stopped us from going to nuclear war with Cuba over the missiles. He said, this is insane. And then later we found out that the Operation Northwoods, which you mentioned, that insane thing, where it was very Sandy Hookish, where they talked about, all these incidents, plane crashes and things, and they would all be blamed on Cuba. And JFK said, no, that's insane. It was approved by the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff. Everybody wanted to do it but him. Single-handedly stopped it. So he was, doing things that no president had done before. So he's making all these enemies. And then at the same time, we didn't find out till much later when Michael Collins Piper wrote the book Final Judgment. The late Michael Collins Piper, who died way too young himself, I had made contact with him and tried to get him to come on the JFK forums, and he'd had enough of being called anti-Semitic. But he was the first one that revealed JFK was at war with Israel too. At the same time, that was that because they were developing nuclear weapons, and JFK didn't want them to do that. And he threatened, he said, no, you're not going to get any more aid from us if you keep doing that. And Israel, of course, ignored him. And, JFK wasn't, he didn't, I don't think he understood, again, even though his father talked about Israel. And I wanted to include, but we couldn't for rum. There was an appendix, a letter that he wrote to his father in 1939, I think. He was 22 years old, just a remarkable letter about if you can find it in the Kennedy Boston Library. I think I've published excerpts of it on my Substack, but it's an incredible, and it's about Israel, which of course didn't come into existence for 8 years, but 8 more years. But he analyzes it. You can tell him and his father discussed this a lot, how disastrous this would be. And so, Kennedy's steeped in this as president. He remembers all this, and now he sees Israel as that his father was one of the first public officials to be very much against creating Israel, very critical of them. And so now he's got to deal with them as they're telling him no. He said, no, you can't. The U.S. is used to telling people they can have nuclear weapons or they can't. He's telling them, no, you can't have nuclear weapons. And Israel doesn't care. They just keep doing it. And so this obviously had to frustrate him. And we're used to seeing that now, with Donald Trump's supposed peace deal in the Middle East, where Israel just ignores it. They just keep bombing. They're peace, they're not doing anything like that. But so you have all those forces allied against him: the Pentagon, the CIA. J. Edgar Hoover hated him. Lyndon Johnson hated him. So all these people could easily be talked into, at the very least, giving thumbs up to it. Who actually organized it, I don't know. But so he had more enemies than any president we've ever seen. But I don't know if that answered your question. It was kind of rambling response. And then
Sure.
what was Ashley's question? Or did I address
The
that? I can't
Dulles
remember.
brothers, and also the smear campaign, but we did touch quite a bit on the smear campaign against the Kennedys. I was wondering also about the relationship with Russia and with Khrushchev. RFK Jr. talks a lot about how there was a good relationship and a secret relationship via letter writing between JFK and Khrushchev.
Yeah, and Khrushchev was crushed when JFK died. So was Fidel Castro, and so it's not that JFK was no communist, but he was. Yeah, they behind the scenes. Khrushchev was, if you remember, Khrushchev was the one in Russia who revealed. They turned on Comrade Stalin. He's the one that revealed how many people Stalin had killed. And all that, but up until then, Stalin was a great hero. Then he was a hero with us. It was Uncle Joe. As Tucker Carlson started saying recently, showing some balls doing it, because I don't know about World War II, but I don't think we should have been given lots of aids to the greatest killer, of the 20th century, Joseph Stalin. He was on our side, and that's a good point to make. To leave Hitler out of it, but why are we siding with Joseph Stalin? So Khrushchev exposed him, and so suddenly Stalin was persona non grata in Russia. So I think he was more receptive to talking to America, and I don't think he wanted nuclear war any more than JFK did. So, and he was crushed. When he died, all the world leaders, De Gaulle, you mentioned De Gaulle, that had been the victim. These people were crushed because they recognized that there was some hope with Kennedy, and here, half of America, wasn't crushed. In the South, a lot of places in Texas, there's still rumors that the high school students and teachers were cheering when it's dead. And I'm sure there were parts of that, places where that was true. But and Ashley's case, when she was saying about the this, just to expound a little bit on the campaign that began with Joe Kennedy Sr., but it did become a campaign against the Kennedy family, and it started in the mid 1970s with Judith Campbell Exner. And I wrote about that in Hidden History, and I think I wrote more about it in American Memory Home. But the same, again, I was a teenager in the mid 70s, and I was lobbying Congress for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry, and they wouldn't pay attention to us. They thought we were nuts and kooks and crazy conspiracy theorists. But they instantly bought Judith Campbell Exner. She had this original press conference with this huge oversized hat and these giant sunglasses, and it was just ridiculous. And she didn't even mention the mafia at her original press conference, which became her big issue. Oh, JFK hit a mobster, Sam Giancana, and I was just thinking about having an affair with both of them. Okay, so this is okay. And I was a mafia mole, and then I was sleeping with JFK too. Okay, and you're supposed to be the good person here. But it was just ridiculous because JFK's administration was the only administration led by RFK who had a zeal to crush the mafia. He wrote a book called The Enemy Within, which was a bestseller, and it was all about the mafia. That's one of the many reasons J. Edgar Hoover hated him, because J. Edgar Hoover didn't think that he publicly said the mafia doesn't exist. It's mythology. So the idea that this administration, the only one that ever tried to do anything about the mafia, was somehow tied in with them. The JFK's connection to the mafia begins and ends with Frank Sinatra being friends with him for a while. Because JFK did have stars in his eyes, like a lot of us. Whether he slept with movie stars, who knows? But he loved hearing gossip from Sinatra, and his brother-in-law was Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford was married to JFK's sister, so he had that connection to Hollywood, and he used to love to badger Peter Lawford for gossip about Hollywood, because obviously Peter Lawford knew all the people there, and he would love to hear, sexual stuff too. He'd love to hear that, and he was like a lot of us. It would be interesting that. But there was no evidence that he was connected to the mafia at all. The 1960 allegations against his father that he bought the election, Cook County, paid for it with Mayor Daley was incredibly corrupt. But if Mayor Daley did anything corrupt for Kennedy, that was what he did his entire career. So why does that stand out? Again, and again, we know from elections so much shady stuff has been going on forever. So, but that is trotted out by everybody. Well, JFK, his father bought the election for him, Cook County, and, Nixon didn't protest it, and Mayor Daley. Okay, again, where does that come from exactly? What's the original source for that? I don't know, but this is, it's the same kind of mindset that says his father was involved with the mafia, with bootlegging, and it's all mythology. In reality, RFK was circumventing the law, wasn't right, but he had taken to grabbing monsters like Santos Trafficante, mobsters like Santos Trafficante, and capturing them on the street, and just
I was
flying them over.
Go into the trials, because RFK Jr. talks about being taken to court and watching his dad just fry these gangsters in court, and then also
yes.
Also, McCarthy, wasn't RFK Jr. on some McCarthy staff or something? Or
Yes, he was.
RFK, so maybe those two topics.
Yeah, he started out as a junior counsel for McCarthy, along with Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn later kind of came in later, who became Donald Trump's mentor. But so these things are all connected. But RFK had a zeal to root out mafia corruption. And if you watch him, he had balls of steel. And Sam Giancana, who we're supposed to believe now, according to Judith Campbell Exner, was arranging and sharing a mistress with JFK. He's his buddy. Him and Sinatra did. Watch the grilling that RFK Jr. He berated Giancana. Says, "I thought, are you giggling, Mr. Giancana? Are you giggling?" And he says, "I thought only girls giggled, Mr. Mink. I'm just emasculating him, making this mobster." And you can see he's like, he said the same thing with Hoffa. He said, "Did you?" He said, "Did you threaten me, Hoffa?" whose ass were you going to kick? Or he didn't say ass. I forget something. Were you going to kick or something? And but if you watch him in action, this is not a guy that's. If his brother had some mafia connections, and it actually is supposedly the reason why JFK stopped, fraternizing with Sinatra, is because RFK told him it's a bad look. This guy has mob connections, and so he stopped their family. And Sinatra, of course, was upset about it, but he didn't want his brother to be implicated in anything like that. So the idea that this was some kind of Kennedy family connection is ridiculous, and that it's all mythology, and it's all based on Judith Campbell Exeter. People can read what I wrote about it in Hidden History, especially where it's just the same people that wouldn't listen to young people like me about the single bullet theory and all these other aspects of the assassination. That's just crazy. She comes up there with her oversized sunglasses, huge hat, and just theatrically starts talking about this nonsense. She's instantly accepted by the same media figures. Instantly. And that's when, to Ashley's line of questioning, that's when the slander campaign turns more towards the Kennedy family itself. And you have, I have some of these books in my library, those wild Kennedy boys and things like that, where they started really going after them. Most of these things aren't sourced at all. And the idea, they started showing that, and I don't know if you guys saw that horrible ABC special that just aired a few days ago, JFK Truth and Lies. It's really it's just as same as all the others are, but it's amazing that they haven't evolved at all. They're just still the same lies. But they bring up the same kind of thing there with their only criticism of the autopsy was that the Kennedy family, it wasn't a complete autopsy because the Kennedy family didn't want anything known about his Addison's disease. They were, it's all lies. RFK, I've talked about this in my book. RFK signed a form for the autopsy that said no limitations. He put no limitations on it at all. That's in the record. But again, they're lying, and that's what they think was covered up, that JFK had Addison's disease. Not the crazy stuff they did of moving bullets around and finding bullets, stuff that weren't there. But that's what they put out there. And they blame the Kennedys. So that much as when JFK's brain was lost, still don't know where his brain is at. Nothing happened to it. It's only the president's brain. Somehow we don't know where it's at. I found a Secret Service memo. I talked about it in Hidden History, and I updated it in American Memory because I found another memo on it. But basically, it's a Secret Service memo that talked about getting, originally, I understood it to mean the brain, that he got it and he destroyed it in a food processor. He ground it up in a food processor. Yeah, and then now in this one, I found where it's a little clearer, where it's a piece, but it's a substantial piece of his brain that he gets. And he decides to put it in a food processor? Really? This is, I mean, so, that's a Secret Service memo. But they still blame, they'll blame it on RFK, that he took the brain and gave it to Evelyn Lincoln, who they also don't like. She was JFK's secretary. She was the only one talking about conspiracy right from the very beginning. And so they kind of froze her out, and she never got to do the interviews a lot of the others did. She was very loyal to JFK, but and they've still, and all the way to the Secret Service books in recent years, when they've tried to blame Kennedy for his own assassination, that he didn't let us do his job. And again, these Secret Service has been interviewed by Vince Panorama, who wrote a book on it. And every one of them said, no, he was great. He never put any limitations on us. He let us do our job. But still, the mythology's out there that, if he had just let them do their job. So they blame him for his own death. And that's part of it. And by besmirching his character, by making it look like he slept with everybody, from Marilyn Monroe to some Nazi spy, supposedly, that he to Mary Meyer, who is
and some man who stayed at the White House and had a matching bathing suit.
Oh, is it McGeorge Bundy? Probably. I'm not McGeorge. Okay, what's his name? Lem Billings.
Was that supposed to be JFK's best friend that stayed there?
Yes, it is. And Lem Billings, if you can see what kind of a figure he was, and having, I wrote a novel called The Unreals. It's basically, that was my word, because I've been around a lot of unreals in my life. Lem Billings was an unreal, and you can see him if you look at. What is that? Somebody wanted to get on the show. You can see on the videotape when JFK, you can tell he's they've been waiting all night to see before he declares victory in the presidency in 1960 election. He comes out and Lem Billings is there. He's a very kind of eccentric looking character. And you can see he's kind of acting ridiculous. That's what he did. He was a family friend. But again, Joe Kennedy Sr. liked the guy because he was very loyal. He would do anything they asked for him. He kept, so he was always at the parties. He helped with the campaigns. He was good on the campaign. Was, I think, originally RFK's friend, but he helped out all the legendary congressional campaigns, and they were loyal to him. So and he was a lifelong bachelor later, found out because he was gay, and they invited him to all the parties, the family dinners. He did spend the night in the White House, but this has come to me that again, JFK's this Lothario has every, sexual dynamo who was but also on the verge of death because he shouldn't have been president because he was too sick. But somehow he could have sex nonstop at age 40 something while being on the verge of death. It's an amazing specimen. But apparently he was also gay too, because he couldn't get enough. So he would have his crazy, really unreal friend Lem Billings service him. This is anything said about Kennedy is believed. They'll throw it all out there, and we'll get to that Maureen Callahan, who I don't know if she talks about Lem Billings, but that's right up her alley. Maybe she doesn't know about him, but it's absurd. You can't think of a more heterosexual male than JFK. I don't think so. I don't know how he would fit time for that in there, but again, they can throw anything they want about JFK. It's part of the smear because it's basically to make him look like he had no character, no morals, no principles. He treated Jackie miserably, all these things that really aren't true. Because Jackie, there's also rumors that Jackie was having an affair with Aristotle Onassis while JFK was alive. So, who was cheating on who? But it's the idea so that we don't care about his death. Because he wasn't any good anyhow. Like Noam Chomsky, basically, that's what Noam Chomsky's view is basically. Same. He wasn't trying to get out of Vietnam, which he obviously was. But, so nothing would have changed. It would have been the same thing if he had died. Everything would have been the same, which is everything would have been completely different. And that's the gist of the conspiracy against the Kennedys, is that his death, RFK's death, affected nothing. Everything would have still been the same when we know it affected everything. The 1960s would have been completely different if JFK hadn't been killed. There wouldn't have been an anti-war movement because we would have been out of Vietnam. There wouldn't have been a Vietnam War. I don't know if there would have been a counterculture. Would there have been drugs? I don't know. Would there have been a sexual revolution? Who knows? I don't know.
Okay, I'd like to, if possible, maybe move into a little bit more esoteric. I wanted to talk about the Byrd family, about well, first of all, there's Admiral Byrd, who went to Antarctica, and it's famous for saying that, that there's a hole and that there are ships coming from the, out, and that which New Schwabenland is said to be there, and that the Nazis went to Antarctica and established a base there, and then Admiral Byrd went a few times, and he did a expose on Longines, The March of Time TV show, and talked about how there was unexplored land, and a lot of things that are really kind of controversial and eye-opening. And then you also had Dryhole Byrd, who was who recently acquired the Schoolbook Depository, I believe, that had been standing empty. And then, so just before the Kennedy assassination, Oswald was hired there, and Dryhole Byrd was also known to be close with LBJ, funding LBJ, and then there's also, and removed one of the 6th floor window and took it to his house. There's a story about that. And then there's also a Senator Byrd who and this is from Dark Journalist episodes, and Peter's familiar with Dark Journalist, and he talks about the Byrds a lot. And so there's also a Senator Byrd that is said to have pushed for Operation Paperclip and helped fund NASA and those things. So the Byrd family seems to be extremely involved in all of this and into some fairly esoteric things. I think D.H. Byrd also started, was it Civil Air Defense?
Civil Air Patrol, that was David.
Right, and then wasn't Oswald in Civil Air Patrol as a young man?
Well, yeah.
And
There's a
so,
picture of him standing there. Yeah.
okay, so just maybe some of that type of material, the more esoteric and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, some researchers have looked more into the people that worked at the depository, or in the case of Byrd, owned it. And it is very strange. He was on, I think, a safari in Africa the
Mm-hmm.
day of the assassination, so he wasn't there. But yeah, just removing that window, and he put it up in his home, I think, in his dining or something. He put it up as a keepsake. He
Mm-hmm.
had it up in his home for years. And then when he died, his children had no interest in it, and they donated it back to the sixth floor museum, which has become the kind of the carekeeper of the official story. So, they could put it right back there. And this is where Lee Harvey Oswald didn't shoot from that day. But I don't know much. Peter did a lot of the research on the birds. He loves
Mm-hmm.
this esoteric stuff. So I think it needs to be looked into what kind of backgrounds. A lot of these people, Roy Truly was a manager, and a lot of them have kind of interesting connections themselves as to why, were any of them operatives? Were they maneuvered into that position to be, interacting with Oswald? Because Oswald was obviously, manipulated to go into that position. So I think it bears looking into. But I don't know what that means really. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how, he would have been. But certainly the Byrd family deserves to be looked at, especially Admiral Byrd. I did talk to Admiral Byrd's grandson. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago when I was kind of researching that stuff, and I told him about the Longines special. I said, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think?" I said, "You can still go on YouTube and see it." I mean,
Yes.
the guy's talking about a landmass as bigger than the United States that would provide all the resources we would ever need that he saw. This is not a
Mm-hmm.
conspiracy theory. He was the guy. He was the world's greatest explorer. And there's what happened to that thing? Well, there's no landmass there supposedly. And then he died shortly after that. And his son died strangely too. I think he was found in an abandoned building or something. This is what happens to these people, But that's why I never, I always include them, these deaths, because most people aren't found in abandoned buildings. But if you're Admiral Byrd's son, I guess you are. But um, I don't know what that means beyond it, but that's interesting stuff. And people, of course, speculate about the flat earthers the hollow earthers, and they all speculate something's going on in Antarctica. So, and they have that treaty that was all the first world nations after Byrd's death, after he made that comment, they signed that treaty, and you can't go to parts of Antarctica now. I don't know why. I guess
Yeah. I
there's
also
no ulterior motive for that.
I heard that there's a mountain in Antarctica named after dry hole bird, and just a lot of esoteric type things. I was wondering, I'm the whole Manchurian Candidate issue, the Dave McGowan type things, the your book, the American Memory Hole. There's a part about two important assassinations, which were MLK and RFK, and then there's a quote from Sirhan saying, "I didn't kill anybody." So if you maybe want to go into that a little bit, and then I also read or heard in another podcast from Mark Grubert that he found that Lee Harvey Oswald was given LSD in 1959 when he was stationed in Japan in the Civil Air Patrol, and that he also, when he was in New Orleans, he at the Tulane campus, there is a kind of a Tulane or Louisianan Jolly West there, whose name was Heath, Professor Heath, who's another father of MK Ultra. And so Heath had LSD in his labs there, and this Mark Gruber, I'm not sure what your opinion of his is, but he claims that Oswald had LSD in 1959 when he was stationed in Japan with the Civil Air Patrol, but also at Tulane University, some students stole a bunch of LSD and had a party, and that one of the people at that party was Lee Harvey Oswald. And then I just have a little quote here about Robert G. Heath, a controversial figure in the history of deep brain stimulation. So wherever you'd like to
Yeah,
go
no, I
with
think,
that, or
yeah, I
just
mean, I
let
think
Don
that's,
roll. Oh,
yeah, well, Yeah, I think that Lee Harvey Oswald definitely was not a Manchurian candidate, but Sirhan probably was. Arthur Bremer, who shot George Wallace, probably was. James O'Reilly, I don't think was. But we know if you Operation Mind Control was written by Walter Boart. I read it a long time ago. It's in my library. It talks about these things. We know the CIA was messing around. They had a movie called The Manchurian Candidate that couldn't be seen for decades that talked about it, and Jolyon West shows up. He ended up visiting. I think he visited with Jack Ruby, who
Yes.
he may be a Manchurian candidate. But now more and more people are sending me stuff all the time that say Jack Ruby didn't actually shoot him, and I'm looking at this stuff, and it is odd. Some of the things that you see with that. I don't know what that means because Ruby certainly had the background, but it is what it is. The evidence is what it is. But Jolyon West did visit him, and he was when even Alex Jones has talked about him. He's a big figure in mind control. So I think that Oswald's case was different than the other. Sirhan, I think, was a classic case. If you read his notebook, he had, of course, all these patsies and assassins keep diaries.
Of course.
They just do. I mean, it keeps a diary. Although RFK Jr. did. I have
Yes,
excerpts
he
from that.
did.
I found that a little odd, but most people don't in the real world anymore, especially But so you had Sirhan's diary it's if you look at it, it's he writes Illuminati several times, the Illuminati. He writes pay to the order of Sirhan. It's like he's someone's dictating this, or it's automatic writing or something. He talks about the Boston Strangler, Albert Salbro, and very strange stuff in his. It's not just kind of a series of repeated phrases. It's not really a diary, but it's curious. And Sirhan he doesn't really say that he didn't kill anybody. He always says he doesn't remember anything. That
Mhm.
he in the last, and we know there was a girl in the polka dot dress who, excuse me, I think is the key, was almost certainly his handler. Like you see, Rabbi Shmuley would be RFK Jr.'s handler. This
Yes.
was his handler, and she's described by everybody. And in Hidden History, I found lots of accounts where this girl was seen with Sirhan many other occasions before the assassination. So she was handling him. And apparently she was really had a great body and everything. So I guess that's how she dragged Sirhan along. I guess for as long as she did. And he's always said the last thing he remembers is the girl giving him coffee or something, and then that's the last he remembers until he's being arrested. So that would typically, I guess, be how that works. Or something. Maybe a key phrase was, and so he turned off. But much different because in certain this is only one of the assassinations where he unquestionably had a gun and was firing shots. It's just he didn't hit anybody,
Mhm.
and he certainly couldn't have killed RFK. So what was he doing there with a gun, and why did they try to pin all this on him when the autopsy report suggested otherwise? Did you have a question,
Right.
Ashley?
Go
I
ahead, Ash.
did. So in bringing up Jolly West, I think that there's a really interesting connection that you kind of give some teasers to in your Substack that you dig into more in your books. But I was hoping that you could maybe discuss a little bit of the hypnosis, Jolly on West, and Freddie Prinze Jr. or the Freddie Prinze death, and kind of that he was this huge advocate for finding the truth in the assassination of JFK. I don't think a lot of people know that, and I think that that's a really interesting tidbit. But again, like we talk about so often here, it's a web. I mean, you find these same people. We're talking about Operation Mind Control, Walter Bower, the cryptocracy, over and over and over.
That's interesting because I just watched a long video about Freddie Prinze too. It must have come up in both of our feeds.
Hmm.
And the psychiatrist that saw Freddie Prinze was named Kruger, who also worked with Candy. Was it Candy Jones? Was that her name?
Candy Jones.
Yeah. So she saw that same psychiatrist, Kruger, saw both Freddie Prinze the night he died and killed himself, and Candy Jones. So
They didn't
very
mention
pervasive.
Freddie's obsession with the JFK assassination.
Yes, he had his own Zapruder
Really?
tape.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
And
he did.
and the video that I saw about this, well, I saw it in your Substack as well, but the video that I saw specifically mentions your book Memory Hold, in your conversation and touching on this particular subject, but I don't think it's one that a lot of people know about.
Well, it's if I hadn't, that's I don't know. I guess that was the first kind of brush I had with this. I realized how deep this stuff went. Again, I was probably 18 years old, and I was in Mark Lane's office. The only time I ever got to go to his townhouse office and meet him. It was very nice, and he's my hero. And I saw his. I was going through his library, and I saw his 26 volumes of hearings exhibits and all the little notations he wrote in them. But I was supposed to be stuffing envelopes or something. But anyhow, we were there, and I was another teenager, and he came and he just starts talking to us about how Freddie Prinze was on. He just got off the phone with Freddie Prinze from Hollywood. And Freddie Prinze at the time was late 1976, and he was the hottest young comedian out there at
Yeah.
that time. He starred in Chico and the
Yeah.
Man. He was a big stand-up. He was only 22 years old, and he
Mhm.
was talking about how Freddie Prinze was obsessed with the Kennedy assassination. He had his own copy of the Zapruder film, and him and Tony Orlando, Don, who was his best friend in real life, they would watch it every day. And Freddie Prinze wanted to do something, and he wanted to have back then telethons were a big deal. He wanted to start a telethon to raise funds for an investigation because, of course, much of the this is some liberal establishment that never complains about funds for anything in government, but they were concerned about money being spent on a new investigation into JFK's assassination. That was a theme they harped on constantly in the newspapers and television. How much this is costing when they finally did open it. But so Freddie Prinze was saying he was having a lot of trouble. How he couldn't, all these activists out there, he couldn't get anybody to appear on the telethon. And again, I'm a good liberal. I'm a radical, but I'm thinking the left are the good guys, and I'm thinking, well, that's weird. Why wouldn't these people want to be on it? What about Jane Fonda? Why wouldn't these people want to be? They had no interest. And although John Barber later told me Jane Fonda dated Mark Lane, so she must be into that too. I don't know. Who knows? But at any rate, I didn't think that much of it, other than that, he said he's calling me all the time. And again, this was late 1976. So Freddie Prinze died, and I remember because he died right before my father, about a month before. So I think he died, he supposedly killed himself in January 77. And when that happened, if I hadn't been there that day, I would have had no reason to tie his death to the JFK assassination at all. But having been there, I was only one of two people, me and the other teenager, and Mark Lane, to know this, to have any kind of an idea. I said, "Wow, it was scary me," and then I watched they had and again, I'm naive, still naive, but I was really naive then. And I'm
That's
thinking,
okay.
okay, they're having a movie of the week. And back then they used to have the last days of Freddie Prinze or something. And so they aired it on one of the networks. And of course it stressed the cocaine and how out of control he was. He was spiraling out of control with the drug use and everything. And I kept waiting and waiting. Not one mention of the sitting there watching the Zapruder film and how obsessed he is with the JFK assassination. It was never mentioned. So that's when I realized, wow, this really is deep. And then later, as I was, I found out Salminio, who was stabbed to death. He was a big actor from Rebel Without a Cause, stabbed to death outside his apartment or something. That this guy had gone on Tonight Show and talked about how the Warren Commission was bullshit, and that he was going to play Sirhan Sirhan. And Orson Welles was trying to make a movie about the RFK assassination, could never get it off the ground for some reason. It would have been fascinating. Salminio did look like Sirhan Sirhan. So I think, okay, well, that guy had some kind of connection. And then I always suspected John Belushi. I always thought his death was weird. And I read in a book on Saturday Night Live, was the history of Saturday Night Live. I read a recollection by Dan Aykroyd that said he counted amongst his friends Judge Jim Garrison.
Oh,
And I was saying,
wow.
okay, why would he be friends with a much older judge? There's only one possible connection there. And then I started reading more about how Belushi would talk about the Kennedy assassination a lot. So he was talking about the same time I was. He was a little older than me. And then I read, it was too late to include in American Memory Hole because I found it afterwards, that Dick Gregory talked about on the night before he died, that Belushi called him and told him, "Hey, man, I have some really good stuff on the JFK assassination. I want to talk to Mark Lane about it." And then, of course, the next day
Wow.
he's dead. So, I mean, I, how many other figures in Hollywood are into that or 9/11 or anything else. Because again, I wouldn't have known about Freddie Prinze, and you really had to dig for this other stuff. So, I think it's pretty obvious that, now
Mhm.
now I think they can get away with it more. People like Charlie Sheen can talk about
I
9/11
was
and stuff,
gonna say
although
Charlie Sheen, the
yeah.
Sheens.
Yeah, but I mean, again, he's kinda wacky and he's doing and they're not gonna hurt him, he's a billionaire probably from Two
Right.
and a Half Men, but he really hasn't worked since then. I don't know that anybody would let him work because Mel Gibson, of course, has talked about a lot of that stuff, but, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I would have never, I have to wonder if Freddie Prinze Jr. And actually I found out from my friend, William Law, who helped me write Pipe the Memo and Red about, the JFK assassination, that, Jim Croce was one of my favorite singers when I was young. I loved Jim
Yeah,
Croce. He died in a plane crash. And, William Law contacted his son and found out again, this guy was obsessed with the Kennedy
and
assassination.
he was
Yeah.
hot. Boy, did he have that one big album,
Oh, I
Jim
had all
Croce.
3 of his albums,
Yeah,
I loved his stuff. But when I was trying to write songs myself, that's what I was trying to do at first. I boy, I could never do anything he did. I can't. I don't know. This guy's way too good. But he was amazing. But so
yeah.
again, just know that that guy was into the Kennedy assassination. Who knows how many others? And they all seem to die. Yes, which is
And,
strange.
I'm sorry to interrupt here. I just wanted to chime in that I think, this is something that I think about all the time and ask questions about. So people like, you're saying celebrities that are speaking out about it now, and that's more allowable. And I think it's because they have set up the dynamic from then all the way to this point that they're crap coding it basically. So they make it really easy for somebody to dismiss you now. Like, "Oh,
Mhm.
you're talking about the JFK assassination. You're a
Yeah.
crazy kook. I don't even need to entertain anything else that you say, or you're talking about X, Y, and Z." And I think they really have done, the cryptocracy has done an amazing job of setting that up to make it so easy for anyone else to automatically dismiss you. It's like their programming, but it's the opposite. It's the programming to reject you and reject these kinds of conversations, and I think that's part of why it is more allowable and acceptable in today's day and time. And I also wanted to say, you brought up Jane Fonda, and she has the Vietnam connection, right? They called her, I don't
Mhm.
know, Viet Cong Jane or something like that, and
Hanoi Jane. Yeah.
Hanoi
Exactly.
Jane, yes, and I was always curious about, was she being genuine, or was this some type of an op, or something like that? But once again, the same names, the same circles over and over and over. It's really, it's mind blowing.
When I was in high school, and I'm about, I think, 5 years younger than Dawn, so I remember the '70s with incredible fondness. But, my boyfriend's father was a Marxist economics professor at the local university, and he did go to Alabama to the riots and things, and Jane Fonda did come to the area and spend the night on his family room floor, so she had boots on the ground, that's for sure, and was making, we're in the middle of nowhere here basically, and she was here spending the night, so
Interesting. That's a great input, Karen, because I was thinking about this in my study recently, on Vietnam, and I was like, maybe she genuinely was, um, you know, very appalled by what she was seeing. And there were some
mhm.
people that were speaking out against this. So maybe that actually was happening. Maybe she was being genuine. And then, like we've seen with so many things, like Don has been talking about, or we've been talking about the smearing for decades of the entire Kennedy family, for and the co-option of movements. And maybe she was just smeared, and it really did put her career on hold for a really long time
Mhm.
after that as well.
Don, another
Yeah.
one I wonder about is Harry Chapin. He had that strange, I think it was a car accident. Um,
Well, no, he wrote about as a but I think he actually died of a heart attack. I think at a very young
it was
age.
a
I
heart
think.
attack.
I think if I remember, I think he like clutched his chest on stage. I think if I remember, I could be wrong, but
It
maybe
was
somebody.
1981. To me, it always seemed kind of strange.
Yeah, well, because his famous song was about riding in a cab, or driving a cab, or one of his big songs, and
Mhm.
so that maybe you're. I think I could be wrong. I don't. Yeah, I wonder about all those because I again, you don't know. I wonder about Graham Parsons going back to the Flying Burrito Brothers and one of the birds for a while, but very strange death, and he's the guy took it. I talked about that in Unborrowed Fame, where they took his body out and burned it in the middle of the desert or something. He claimed that's what he's wanted, or something. It's very odd.
Right,
But
right.
so who knows? I mean, these people were they could have been like Freddie Prinze, and we didn't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, I know what I was doing back then. I was talking about the JFK, especially, and this radical stuff behind the scenes. So who knows how many of these others were? You're not gonna, you're not gonna find out about it until, like I said, somebody like Belushi. Nobody talked about that until Dan Aykroyd slipped up and says he was friends with Jim Garrison. I don't know if that was
That's
intentional or not,
interesting.
but people like me saw that and I focused in on that. Okay, there's only one reason he would be friends with Jim Garrison.
How is your friend John Barber? How has his career been impacted by being such a good friends with Jim Garrison and such
Yeah.
a
Oh, amazing. I mean, he killed his Hollywood career. I mean, again, he's 92 and going strong. He's led a great life, but I mean, there's no doubt that he would have had a much better, longer career because I mean, everybody knew once he started talking about that, and he was radical anyhow. He got in arguments with the producer of Real People and stuff, and one of those had to do with Jim Garrison, about trying to get him on as a guest. And I'm sure when projects came after that, I mean, they looked at this guy and they knew who he was. Oh, yeah, that's the guy that interviewed Jim Garrison that talks about the JFK assassination. I'd say he's a friend, but I've communicated with him, Paul Lamont, who was a big actor briefly. He was in American Graffiti. He played the character Milner, the cool guy that the Fonzie character was based on in Happy Days.
mm,
So he was in, and I loved him because people used to say I looked like him when he was young. So, but he also made Melvin and Howard and a few other. He made The Burning Bed, where he's the abuser with Farrah Fawcett, the TV
mhm,
movie. That's about his main claims to fame. But then his career kind of dried up, and I've tried to interview him, but he won't do interviews because he says he's in rough shape. He says he's too sick, but he claims they poisoned him.
hmm,
And it affected his health still to the day. And it was because he was looking into the RFK and JFK assassinations. He was working with Robert Vaughn, who was an actor from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and other
mhm.
people. He was very active in that, and other people. So he said, I guess I shouldn't have done that because that really impacted his Hollywood career. So I don't know how many others, but a lot of times I wonder when somebody's career just suddenly stops, or is it because they were talking about the wrong thing? And I'm sure it
Mhm.
happens for sure.
Or they refused to do something. They just
Yeah,
didn't
well,
quite
that's true.
didn't want to pay the price. Okay, is there anything we have several questions. You said you wanted to go about 90 minutes, so we have about
Sure.
20 minutes left. We
Okay,
have
sure.
several questions that are accumulated in our
Sure.
private chat, but if you we have, maybe 5-10 more minutes to talk about whatever you'd like to talk about, what you're working on next, how you do your research, what's new on the JFK scene as far as the new documents and things that are being revealed, or wherever you'd like to go.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd mentioned that I just watched it the other day. It's called JFK, I think, Truth and Lies, or Who Killed JFK, something like that. Yeah, but it's ABC and it's horrible. I watched it. Just absolutely. I can't believe how bad it was. And one of the guys on there was somebody I used to argue on the forums with. This guy, and literally I got him to run from the forum. But he says Oswald did it, so they'll invite him on these shows because there's not many people who are willing to do that. And but he took up most of the time. They had Oliver Stone, who they gave very little time to, and they had Jim DiEugenio, who's Oliver Stone's friend, and I've interviewed him. We know each other, and I think he had one line, and they didn't even put his name on the screen. They had Jefferson Morley, who's been on a couple shows with me, former Washington Post guy, and it's kind of I don't want to say limited hangout, but he's not very extreme. But he says there's a conspiracy, so he's palatable to them. And I think he had one line. So it was just
Mhm.
horribly prejudiced and just trotting out the same old nonsense. And that's the one that had the line about the Kennedy family not wanting to, and that he had Addison's disease. Just ridiculous. I'm surprised they didn't throw out the bootlegger stuff about the old man, but just horrible stuff. So that's that's where the state of it. But fortunately, nobody watches network TV anymore. And I watched it like an idiot, but there's probably maybe 100,000 others that watched it. But whereas people online or the venues online are much more likely to tell the truth about JFK. So that was as for what I'm working on. I have 10 books out there. I'm working on a book about, believe it or not, about sports, and I think that there's a lot of corruption there. And
Absolutely.
I'm the first one ever to talk about the racial dynamics in sports. So this will probably kill off my reputation for good, and probably send my social credit score into plunge it to new depths never seen before. So I don't know if I'll be invited anywhere after this book, but it is what it is. I mean, the data is there; it's irrefutable. It'll be well sourced. And this one is I'm researching it myself because Peter and Chris Graves don't really know about sports, and I think Peter still wants to proofread it, but. Uh, so that's where I'm going with that. It's a labor of love though, because I'm a sports guy. I was involved in sports
Mhm.
most of my life, and playing and coaching and my kids and everything. So I'm a fan, and much like politics, it's like heroin to me. I know it's all fixed and rigged, and the best players don't play, but I keep going back to it, just like a heroin addict, and I can't seem to kick it. So I said, what the hell? I'll write a book about it. So I've written about everything else. And
Um,
as far as how I
with
do my research, well, it's not easy because when I first started doing hidden history, it was really easy. I mean, that was so easy to write because you could use Google. You just type in whatever, and you could find the source instantly. So you could go to the story in the Washington Post, or whatever, and you had the story, you had the date and everything, so you could source it really easily, much better than like going to the library and microfiche. But by the time the last few books came around, and Chris Graves and Peter, thank goodness they appeared and did a lot of research for me because they're better at navigating these things. I mean, I use a dozen different search engines, the Russian search engines, Yandex, and all these ones, and none of them are great. They all know what you're looking for. So something on sports, especially, like if you're trying to cast aspersions on anything about black athletic superiority or something like that, or that whites are being discriminated against, every search engine knows, and they just block it. They send you to the exact opposite. So it's really hard to go around it. So I mean, I have a bunch of old Sports Illustrateds around here somewhere. I don't know if I want to go to that extent to start getting them out, but they have to though. But so it's become a lot more difficult, and thank goodness I have those guys that are willing to do it, because not like can have a paid research staff. So they make it a lot simpler. But nonfiction, without these, shadow bans, without these restrictions and censorship, it's really easy for me anyhow to write nonfiction if you don't have these restrictions. The hard part is because I like to source everything. And if I'm trying to find a source for it, and sometimes you just can't. So sometimes I have to take something out of the book because I don't want to put something unsourced in there, and that's no fun. I don't know if there was another question in there. I'm not sure.
Well, there are several questions people have put in the chat. I want to read you. It's a
Sure,
real mixed bag. Some of them are
sure.
a lot more serious than others. The first one is from Lieutenant Oracle of Truth, who is Laura. Don, how did you meet Susan Olson?
Well, I still never met him, but in the physical sense. But uh, it's very strange. I don't. How did I meet? I don't even know what the first interaction was. It was very weird because when I started going online, I already was developing the idea for Unborrowed Fame, and so I wanted to write this book about old TV stars and old bands and everything, and how they were ripped off. So I'd already kind of started doing the research, and I pretty much did the research myself for that. But so I started befriending a lot of these old people like that, and Susan Olsen was just friendly. She
Mhm.
just would talk to you, much like John Barber, but Susan Olsen
Uh-huh.
would instantly talk to you, and she and I just clicked. I mean, we just had an instant rapport with each other, and she asked me to come on her. She had a show on LA Talk Radio then with another woman, and so she asked me on, and just we just would get together and we'd laugh and joke, and I felt I could say anything to her. Yeah, I could make Brady Bunch jokes, and but also say, and so it's true. So she's really cool. I mean, I can't tell
Yeah.
you how much it means to me. I never thought I would be, and it's not like I never desired to meet Cindy, right? Maybe Marsha, but never occurred to me that I'd be friends with the youngest one in curls, but she's politically, she's on this much of the same wavelength. You know, she's much more far right wing than I am, but we can talk about all this stuff. And so it's great. It's a great when
Yeah.
she's on my show. It's a great combination because it's, you know, it's half showbiz trivia and half, you know, conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, we have a few from White Wolf here.
White Wolf, yeah.
Yeah, do you think Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are shills? Are we on the cusp of World War III? Those are a couple from White Wolf.
Well, I know White Wolf thinks they're shills because I think he thinks everybody's. I think he thinks Thomas Massey is. I doesn't think I'm a shill. I don't think. Definitely not anyhow. He keeps coming back, but you know, Candace Owens kind of came out of nowhere. All these people I think are like Nick Fuentes. These people, somebody I think is backing them. I don't because I know how hard it is for me to try to expand my audience. Maybe I'm just no good at it, but I mean, it's. I'm always suspicious of people that kind of come out of nowhere and suddenly have 1 million followers. I know how hard that is to get. And Candace Owens is very good, and she was backed by the Daily Wire at first because they wanted a black female face as conservative, and she ended up not being what they thought, I think. But maybe somebody's paying her to say this stuff now. She's saying a lot of stuff I think is great. So
Yeah.
and Tucker Carlson too. I know his father worked for the CIA, and I'm aware of what he
Mhm.
used to think. But I just, you know, I agree with 90% of what Tucker Carlson says. So maybe he's a shill. I don't know. I know that they are shills. I know they're disinfo agents. It's just I can't prove it. So I take everybody at face value until they're proven otherwise.
White Wolf says no. Don is not a shill.
Well, it's good to know.
Here's another one from.
I must be something then.
Yes, absolutely. White Wolf, is Thomas Jefferson still your favorite founding father, or how do you reconcile him hanging out with perverts like Ben Franklin?
Well, I don't think he hung out with Ben Franklin as much. Ben Franklin was much older than him, and it was kind of a fatherly figure. I mean, and Thomas Jefferson got nowhere near the Hellfire Club. And if you wonder how far these things go, like in fact, they're probably watching it up there now. My son and some of my other friends that we get together with on Saturday, they're probably watching the new season of Stranger Things. They love that. On Stranger Things, they have the Hellfire Club, and
Mhm.
they know where that term came from. And that was the, you know, very blasphemous cult that Ben Franklin was a member of. And, you know, they had this, you know, talking about the 1700s, they had prostitutes dressed as nuns, you know, engaging in orgies and underneath an old, you know, monastery or something, just really dark stuff. And they're the ones, and people credit it to Aleister Crowley, you know, the demon who supposedly sacrificed babies that all the rock stars love. But you know, he's credited with "Do Without Will," and that
Mhm.
it's saying "Do Without Will" actually comes from the Hellfire Club. So people in the Stranger Things must know something about that. But no, I don't. I don't think Thomas Jefferson. I think Benjamin Franklin said some great things too. He
Mhm.
did, as I wrote about in Hidden History, he did end up with human skeletons in the walls of one of his homes he owned in England, and he somehow got away with that. I don't know. Years later, well, it couldn't have been him, so that was kind of strange. But Thomas Jefferson had no trace of that kind of scandal, and yeah, he's my favorite founder. Yeah, although you know Patrick Henry's right there, and Vince Agnelli's favorite George Mason is there, and Thomas Paine. I love all of them. But Jefferson's as a little kid, Jefferson was my favorite because he was the closest famous figure that had a name to Jeffries. So, you know, as a little kid, oh, it's almost like Jeffries. So I just kind of gravitated to him.
Okay, a couple more. Um, do you think the recent? This is White Wolf too, and then we have one from Jason, and then one from LTO again. Do you think the recent shootings of the National Guard people were completely fake and gay?
Yeah, Whitewood thinks everything's fake and gay.
Yes,
I
he
don't know what
keeps
that
us
means.
honest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, everybody's kind of. I don't know if he made that up, but I hear everybody saying fake and gay spelled Gagey. I don't know what that means, but
Mhm.
I don't know, you know, because I was Peter Seakosh, he's going to send me information on it later. He sends me stuff, research for later books and stuff too.
Yeah.
He's looked into it. I think he kind of suspects that. I don't know. I really don't know much about it, but as I said, when these events happen, I just assume they're fake until proven otherwise, because they always seem suspicious to me. So I wouldn't doubt that it was, but I really can't speak about it because I haven't really looked at it whatsoever.
Okay, this is from Jason. Of all the scandals floating around out there, and I think he means about the JFK assassination, what do you think is the biggest factor in the assassination?
As to why he was assassinated?
Well,
Yeah,
why or how or whatever you think is a
yeah. Well, I think
overlooked factor.
I
I
think
can clarify, Karen.
Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
the question I wanted to know was we had the winding down of Vietnam, pulling out. We had the moon stuff going on. We had the Cuba Missile Crisis stuff going on, and we had Operation Northwoods got exposed. I lean towards the Operation Northwoods thing, but something was a triggering event that caused them to take out a U.S. president in public, and in public is the big thing. It's a very big thing on national TV live. So I don't know. What's your opinion? What do you think was the point where someone said we need to take this guy out to send a message to everyone else?
And Oswald was also taken out publicly a couple days later.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then you take out the, and then the would-be assassin, the Patsy, was taken out publicly as well in police custody. So, I mean, there's a huge message that was sent there that everything changed in our politics after that. That's why this is a big topic and why I stayed backstage, because I'm not as astute as y'all on this. So I was going to bow out and just let y'all talk. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think was the thing that said, you know what, enough's enough, and we're going to send a message?
Well, I think was there any one thing? Well, let's look at what happened in 1963. June 1963, he makes the American University speech. I think it's the greatest speech ever delivered by an American politician, and probably signed his death warrant if it hadn't. And also during that summer, he's engaging with this increasingly angry war of words with David Ben-Gurion of Israel. And now I tend to go towards Israel being the final tipping point because if you look at the files that were released earlier this year, Tulsi Gabbard herself got rid of all the redactions, and all the redactions in these files that had been released before, every one of them had to do with Israel and James Angleton. People talk about Alan Dulles. I think James Angleton was the conduit in the CIA. Whatever connection to the CIA there, and I don't think it was just the CIA. I think Angleton was very probably a Mossad agent. He has a monument to him in Israel. So I think that probably was a tipping point. But also a lot of people think, at the time he wanted to print his silver certificates and was in a war of words with the Federal Reserve as well. Those are some pretty powerful people. Were any one of them the final tipping point? I don't know, but you had, Curtis LeMay and some other nuts over in the Pentagon that wanted to kill him. You had probably pretty much most of the people in the CIA, they killed whoever, LBJ, Israel. I think they all kind of came together. I don't know what I don't know how they organized or anything, but I think 1963 was a very interesting year because you had the fact he was the National Security Act Memorandum 263, which was delineating the withdrawal process from Vietnam. That's following the June 1963 American University speech. So this guy was clearly his father's son, and he was walking the walk on peace. That had never happened before. Again, the military-industrial complex had never been disobeyed before, and JFK disobeyed them like 3 times while he was in office.
That's
my take, blatantly.
Well, that's my take, Don, is that everybody's bread is buttered, and it appalls me because you're talking about millions or billions of dollars go out to these contracted people to build weapons and put them throughout the world, and cause wars, create enemies, cause wars. So we have to use these munitions, so we have to replenish them, and there's a huge cash flow thing going on, and they get maybe a few 100,000 out of it. And how many deaths, it just appalls me. And, I was military for 20 years. And it bothers me, actually 25 years when you considered I was a contractor in between my 2 enlistments. So 25 years, that's a quarter century I did this. And now that I know what it's about, I'm kind of sick into my stomach that I was a part of it at times, So, But
I can
that's why I asked the question, because we had so much going on with Russia, the tensions with Russia and Cuba, and still Vietnam with the domino thing and all that crap. It all really ties back to communism, that boogeyman that we need to fund to fight, and that money circulates right back around from the taxpayer through the people who build stuff and back into the campaign contributions. It is a money laundering scheme, in my opinion, and the bankers make a ton of money on it, by the way. Yeah. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think you described it right, and I think that I just again I don't know how these things work, but I think all these forces that you talked about and I talked about, they all were involved, and maybe some even beyond that. But there are a lot of Texas oil men. I mean, he got rid of the oil depletion allowance, which is a huge tax break for them. Was that again? But I don't think any one of these groups could have pulled it off easily. But I think they all came together and in kind of a confederacy, a consortium or something. And like Oliver Stone said in JFK, I think he had it right when he said there's something in the wind. Somebody makes a call from the Pentagon, somebody makes, and I think that's. But if you look at my book, Pipe the Bim on Red, when we talked about New Orleans, I mean, that's not a rogue element. I mean, there's something very coordinated going on that throughout the summer of 1963 is manipulating Lee Harvey Oswald around New Orleans.
Yes.
And is manipulating these other people like David Ferry and Jack Martin, and come into contact with Clay Shaw. And in that book, I talked about all the incredible connections Clay Shaw had. He had connections to everyone. And so he was, I think, the conduit. But I mean, all these other people, Jack Ruby, and I think, like Jim Garrison, that Lee Harvey Oswald was an undercover agent, and he was on assignment at the time of the assassination. He was told to infiltrate a plot to kill the president. I now think that all those other people were told the same thing. Jack Ruby was an FBI informant. David Ferry was CIA. All these people were some kind of government agents. I think they all were told the same thing. Hey, infiltrate this plot, and they were used against each other. And eventually, maybe it was always going to be Oswald as the patsy, or they just chose him at some point. But looking at that, you're Oswald impersonators in New Orleans. This is before they started impersonating him in Dallas. And so there's a lot. That's a deep conspiracy. And you can read my work. That's why I really resent it when whatever it was, when people say this was rogue elements of the CIA or mafia. It's nonsense. This was really deep state architects and very powerful people. Because what can 62 years later, when I'm watching that stupid special on ABC, to still hear the same lies, and most of these people weren't born yet. And they're still mouthing the same nonsense that Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather did. Who's powerful enough to get them to keep doing that? You're still lying about it. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay.
No,
I'm trying to honor
good, Don.
Don's
Thank
time
you.
here. He said he had 90 minutes, so we're getting down to the wire.
Okay. Well, did I miss a question, or was it?
Well, there's a couple questions I wanted to ask. LTO asked, and I know this is relevant. You're talking about New Orleans, Louisiana. Seeing there's so much that went on there with the cancer research and the
Mary Sherman,
Dr. Heath, and so many things going on, Cuba connections and all. So she says, Dawn, I just watched Shannon Joy's documentary about Dr. Judith Vary Baker and Lee Harvey Oswald and how they were developing gain of function to take out Castro. So she just wanted any comments you had on Judith Vary Baker, or what, that type. She's been on your show, hasn't she?
No, she hasn't. I should ask her. I'm kind of a Judith Vary Baker agnostic.
Okay.
She has her fans, and she has lots of people that think she's not credible.
Right.
I don't know what to think of her. I think there's something there. I think I think it's been documented she worked at the Riley Coffee Company at the same time Oswald did. So I think they knew each other, possibly had an affair. I mean, some people have criticized her by saying, how come there are no pictures of you with Oswald? Well, he was a married man, so I don't know. In 1963, did they tend to take pictures with their mistresses? I don't think so, but maybe they did. But I don't think so. That doesn't surprise me, but it's possible. But I think as time goes on, and this happens to a lot of people are human beings, they tend to exaggerate their role and stuff. I think she's kind of come to, like, for instance, she's saying they were developing gain of function to take out Castro, and she's come to make it seem like she was working with Oswald. I don't know that, because I think he was an undercover agent. I don't know that he would have trusted her. I don't think she said that she was, but I don't know. I really don't know enough. I need to have her on the show, but I mean, she seems okay, and she's got a following. You know, and she's talking about the right thing, that there was a conspiracy to kill JFK. But I really can't speak. I don't know enough about her to speak to that. But there's something was going on there, whether it was gain of function research. Dr. Mary's Monkey is an important book, and Mary Sherman, you know, died very strangely. You know, she was a you know, the victim of a fire, which she also had a bullet hole to her in her chest. So, you know, kind of strange fire. But so, you know,
So
that
I
kind of
just
was a calling card, you know.
Yeah, I think there was huge radiation going on in that lab too with her. The machines were incredibly powerful from what I've read. I don't know. You know more about it than I do. So I want to plug a few more things. Happy birthday to our great friend Angry Tygo Franco. I hope you have a
Hey,
wonderful birthday, and
happy
hope you had
birthday.
a great Thanksgiving. Also, Don, LJ loves your shirt. Little John loves your shirt as
I
usual.
wish more people loved my shirts. I don't know what it is
I
with him
do.
and my
I'm a
shirts.
huge flannel fan. You can't see mine, but it's a green plaid. I
Oh,
love the plaid shirts. And then RB Ham, I wanted to remind everybody that
yes.
Dawn will be on RB's show this evening. You want to shout that out,
Yeah,
Dawn?
9 p.m. on RB Ham's courageous Canadian trucker who was part of the convoy up there, and they punished him. They fined him with some ridiculous amount of money, so you can help him out if you could. That would be great. But it's called Beyond the Pale. It's his Rumble channel. You find the links on my social media and his, but it's RB Ham, and we'll be talking with. I'm on there with Salim Mansour, who's a former big shot, I think, in the Bush White House or something, who's now become a conspiracy guy and likes my stuff, and I love what he
Cool.
does too. So it'll be an interesting discussion. RB has me on there almost every Saturday. I think it's going to
Yeah,
be 8 p.m. tonight. Yeah,
I
8
saw
p.m.
you a
Eastern.
couple weeks ago there, and so I'll check that out tonight. And then I wanted to thank everybody for being here today and say that Dawn is on America Unplugged with Billy Ray Valentine and Tony Arterburn every Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific, which would be 12 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, X, YouTube, quite a few channels.
Let me plug them real
And,
quick. Let me plug them all real quick, Karen, if I can.
okay.
I know I was sitting backstage, but Don mentioned his social media, and if people want to find that show he's going to be on tonight, let's go ahead and shout him out, right?
Go for it.
So you can go to our website, right? thenightsofthestorm.com, alternatively knightsots.com, and you will find Don right here, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Substack. There's your YouTube, Don, which I know that sometimes you got to pull stuff down because they hate you over there, just like they hate us. America Unplugged. By the way, you and Ashley did a great job last week. That was amazing. That's what inspired the show today, to do a second rendition of it with Karen. And I just kind of stepped back because I just don't know as much as y'all know about it. And fascinating conversation, by the way. And then your ex, Don Jeffries, it's at Don Jeffries. And then the Substack is where you're really gaining traction, right? That's where you're not shadow banned.
That's the only place I'm being allowed to grow a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Donald Jeffries at substack.com.
Right. And again, you can go to the Friends, Knights of the Storm /Friends page and get to all those links right there. And one thing I wanted to make sure we didn't forget, and that's kind of why I wanted to pop in, by the way, so we didn't forget it. I know you're running short on time, Don, but your books, I literally had a hard time finding them. It's not so bad now, but back when we added you to the website and I wanted to add you to our read, so we have the Knights of the Storm /read, and that's where we have yourself, Gardner Goldsmith, other people that do books and stuff. It was very difficult to find where to get your books. You showed up, but you showed up under like 3 different people on Amazon. It was kind of weird. And I know you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So like I would go to one account and click on one link and it had like 2 books there. And then I go click on another one and have like one book there. So we've compiled this here on the Knights of the Storm website. We got Masking the Truth, and you are at the top of the list, by the way. I don't know why you're at the top. It just randomly happened that way. But Masking the Truth, Hidden History, Bullyocracy, Survival of the Richest, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics by Don Jeffries, of course, On Borrowed Fame, and The Unreals are all listed there. And it will take you to, I believe I got with you when we got the preferred locations you wanted them to buy them at.
Yeah.
But anyway, I
Yeah,
wanted to make sure we didn't forget to promote your books because they're good.
I appreciate that.
Ashley, you want to do the shout outs real quick?
Sure, I will try to do this without coughing.
I was going to say, I wasn't sure you were up to it, so I don't want to stress you.
I'm gonna try, but
Okay.
I'm gonna get through these guys. So, White Wolf, Doc Spoiler, Sweets, LTO, Zoe, Do Not Obey, Ronnie Omelets, Skunk Hollow Rose Gardens, Ricky from Anything Is Possible, Robin Lee, Bronx Stomper, Geesebusters, Brian Taylor, Will to Box, Bulldag, RB Ham, Angry Tiger, Tom Cooper, Torches and Pitchforks, Ghost Art, Little John, Raz, Linda Craig. And if anybody else, if I missed you, my apologies. Please make a comment in the chat if I missed you. That was not intentional. I always try to catch everybody.
Yes. Okay, so I want to thank Don so much for joining us. So your work is just incredible, and I'm learning so much more just in the last few days. Trying to prepare for the show, and I've always been curious about this and heard so many of these names, but the intricacies of it are just incredible. So I really appreciate you so much. I'm looking to forward to your book about sports. I've always been a sports enthusiast, but I came to the realization 5 or 7 years ago that I really just need to not be so obsessed with it because it's most likely fixed. And so I just pretty well laid off of it, but I was always a sports fanatic too. I want to thank Jason and Ashley for being such awesome co-hosts, and so great to work with every week. And to say thank you to everybody in the chat and say keep going, little Johnny boy, you're doing great there. And prayers for everybody who's having struggles or family issues. So Jason and Ashley, go ahead and sign off for us. Go ahead, Jason.
I'll go first. Yeah, Little John, you kind of upset me, man. I wear a flannel for you once in a while, and you never flatter me like you do.
Mine either. Mine either.
I know, right? I don't know. He likes you, Don. But no, I want to thank. I do want to thank Don for coming out, and thank Karen for hosting it. And like I said, I'm not really up to speed on this topic, so I kind of try to stay out, but you guys did a great job, and thank you for letting me come in at the last minute. And there was one other thing I wanted to say, and I forget what it is. Oh yeah, please, we have 40 people right now watching live on Twitter, which is amazing because we're super shadow banned on Twitter. So to have 40 people watching live right now is an amazing thing. I would love to shout you out, but I don't know who you are unless you leave a comment. So leave a comment. We will shout you out. And that's all I have, Karen.
Okay, Ashley. You want to say goodbye?
Yes, I do want to say goodbye. And I just wanted to say thanks so much to Don for joining us today. It's always a pleasure.
I had a blast. Thanks for having me anytime, guys.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so
Love
much.
to have you back anytime. Yep. Any topic you'd like to talk about.
And thank you to everybody in the chat for always showing up for us, for your support. We truly appreciate it and look forward to seeing you every single week. It really means a lot to us. So thank you so very much. And thank you to my fellow knights. And remember, keep your sword sharp and your armor tightened. Until next time. Oh my gosh.